Sarah Martinez moved through the military supply depot like a ghost. Every morning at 0500 hours, she arrived at Fort Braxton in North Carolina, punched her time card, and disappeared into the rows of equipment shelves. While other soldiers gathered around coffee machines, sharing stories and jokes, Sarah kept to herself. She cleaned rifles that had never seen combat. She organized gear that would never leave the warehouse. She did her job without complaint, without conversation, without drawing any attention to herself. But attention found her anyway. "Look at Martinez over there," Sergeant Rick Coleman whispered to his buddies during their morning break. "Been here 6 months and still acts like she's too good to talk to anyone." His voice carried across the depot floor, loud enough for Sarah to hear every word. She didn't look up from the M4 rifle she was methodically cleaning. Coleman was everything Sarah wasn't. Loud, confident, and popular with the other soldiers. He had never deployed overseas, but he talked like he had seen every battlefield in the Middle East. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his boots shined to mirror perfection. He commanded respect through volume and bravado, and he made sure everyone knew he was destined for bigger things than warehouse duty. "Maybe she's shy," suggested Private Lisa Chen, one of the few soldiers who had tried to befriend Sarah. Chen was young, fresh out of basic training, and still believed in giving everyone a chance. Coleman laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Shy? No, she thinks she's better than us. Some people come into the military thinking they're special, but warehouse duty is warehouse duty. We're all the same here." He gestured toward Sarah, who continued working as if she hadn't heard him. "She'll learn soon enough that keeping quiet doesn't make you mysterious. It just makes you invisible." The truth was, Sarah preferred invisible. She had requested this assignment specifically. After the doctors cleared her for light duty, after the mandatory counseling sessions, after the medal ceremony she had refused to attend, warehouse work felt like exactly what she needed. No decisions that affected other people's lives. No split-second choices between life and death. Just simple, predictable tasks that let her mind rest. Every piece of equipment she touched told a story. The scuffed boots belonged to soldiers heading to their first deployment. The worn tactical vests had protected someone's son or daughter in places where protection meant everything. The helmets had shielded young minds from horrors they would carry forever. Sarah understood these stories in ways her coworkers couldn't imagine, but she never spoke about what she understood. "Martinez." Coleman's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up to find him standing directly in front of her workstation, arms crossed, wearing his practiced look of authority. "The captain wants all equipment inspected and cataloged by end of week. That means actually working, not just playing with the same rifle for 2 hours." Sarah nodded once and returned to her task. The rifle's barrel was already clean, but she ran the brush through it again anyway. Coleman expected a response, an excuse, maybe even an argument. When he didn't get one, his face reddened slightly. "You know what your problem is?" Coleman stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an intimidating whisper. "You think this job is beneath you. You think you're slumming it with the rest of us regular soldiers? But this is the real military, Martinez. This is where you prove you belong." Sarah's hands never stopped moving. She had faced down insurgents with rocket-propelled grenades. She had made impossible decisions under enemy fire while her team's lives hung in the balance. A frustrated sergeant with hurt feelings didn't even register on her scale of things worth worrying about. But Coleman interpreted her silence as weakness. "I'm talking to you, soldier," he said, louder now, drawing attention from across the warehouse. Other soldiers stopped their work to watch the confrontation. "When a superior speaks to you, you respond." Sarah finally looked up, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that made him take an involuntary step backward. Her dark eyes held depths that made people uncomfortable. Depths that spoke of experiences most soldiers would never have. For just a moment, Coleman felt like he was looking at someone who had seen too much, done too much, survived too much. Then Sarah spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "Yes, Sergeant. Equipment will be cataloged by end of week." Coleman blinked, thrown off by the simple compliance. He had expected defiance, argument, something he could use to assert his authority more dramatically. Instead, he got professional acknowledgement that left him with nothing to push against. "Good," he said, but the word came out uncertain. "Good, that's what I wanted to hear." As Coleman walked away, muttering to his friends about respect and military discipline, Sarah returned to cleaning equipment that was already spotless. She had learned long ago that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was nothing at all. Sometimes survival meant blending in, staying quiet, letting others write their own stories about who you were. But every night, Sarah went home to a small apartment off base where she kept her real story locked away. In her bedroom closet, behind civilian clothes she rarely wore, sat a single black case. Inside that case, wrapped in tissue paper that had never been unfolded, lay a bronze star medal with a light blue ribbon dotted with white stars. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded for valor in action against an enemy force. Only 3,500 had ever been awarded in the entire history of the United States military. Fewer than 70 living recipients remained, and none of them were women, until Sarah. But that was a story for another day, a story she had promised herself she would never tell, because the mission that earned her that medal had cost her everything else that mattered. And some prices were too high to celebrate even when the whole world wanted to call you a hero. Tomorrow she would return to the warehouse. She would clean more equipment, ignore more comments, and continue being the invisible soldier that everyone assumed they understood, until someone discovered what she was hiding. 3 weeks passed and the whispers about Sarah Martinez grew louder. In the break room, soldiers speculated about her background. Some thought she was a spoiled officer's daughter who had never earned her rank. Others believed she was hiding some kind of disciplinary action that had gotten her demoted to warehouse duty. The most popular theory, spread by Coleman himself, was that she had failed out of her original military occupation specialty and was too embarrassed to admit it. "I heard she tried out for military police and couldn't handle the pressure," Coleman announced during lunch, making sure his voice carried to where Sarah sat alone at a corner table. "That's why she ended up here with us. Some people just aren't cut out for the real military." Sarah took another bite of her sandwich and turned a page in the book she was reading. It was a novel about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, the kind of story that reminded her there were still simple problems in the world. Problems that could be solved without calling in airstrikes or watching good people die. Private Chen approached Sarah's table hesitantly. Despite Coleman's influence, Chen had continued trying to reach out to the quiet soldier who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Mind if I sit?" Chen asked. Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her. Chen sat down and unwrapped her own lunch, glancing nervously toward Coleman's table where several soldiers were watching their interaction with obvious disapproval. "Don't let them get to you," Chen said quietly. "Coleman's just insecure. He knows he's never going to make it past this base, so he takes it out on anyone who seems different." Sarah looked up from her book, studying the young private's earnest face. Chen reminded her of Martinez. No, that was her own name. Chen reminded her of Rodriguez, the young medic who had been part of her team in Afghanistan. Rodriguez had that same optimistic faith in people, that same belief that kindness could overcome any barrier. Rodriguez had died believing that. "I'm fine," Sarah said simply, returning to her book, but Chen persisted. "You know, if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm a good listener. Sometimes it helps to have someone to talk to, especially when you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with." Sarah's hand tightened imperceptibly on her book. Chen was perceptive, more perceptive than most. She could sense that Sarah was carrying something heavy, something that went beyond normal military stress or homesickness. But Sarah had learned that the kindest thing she could do for people like Chen was to keep her distance. "I appreciate that," Sarah said, and she meant it. "But I prefer to handle things on my own." Chen nodded, disappointed but not surprised. As she gathered her lunch to leave, she paused. "You know, my uncle served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He came back different too. Took him a long time to find his way back to talking to people, but he did, eventually." After Chen left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts and the weight of unspoken truth. Afghanistan. Chen's uncle wasn't wrong about Afghanistan changing people, but he probably came back to parades and welcome home banners and families who called him a hero. He probably didn't come back to classified debriefings and non-disclosure agreements and a medal ceremony he wasn't allowed to discuss with anyone, ever. That afternoon, Sarah was reorganizing a shipment of body armor when she overheard Coleman talking to the warehouse supervisor, Master Sergeant Williams. Williams was a career soldier, 30 years in the military, with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that had earned him respect throughout the base. He was also the one person Coleman couldn't intimidate or impress with his usual tactics. I'm telling you, Sergeant Williams, there's something off about Martinez, Coleman was saying. She's been here months and nobody knows anything about her background. No stories about basic training. No talk about her previous assignments. That's not normal. Williams glanced towards Sarah, who continued working as if she hadn't heard them. Some soldiers prefer to keep their personal lives private, Coleman. Nothing wrong with that. But it's more than that, Coleman insisted. She acts like she's seen things, you know? Like she's been places. But look at her record, straight from basic training to here. How does someone go from basic training to acting like a combat veteran? Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment on the body armor she was organizing. Her personnel file showed exactly what the military wanted it to show. Basic training, advanced individual training, assignment to Fort Braxton. What it didn't show were the 18 months that had been classified above top secret, the mission that had never officially happened, the team that had never officially existed. Maybe she's just mature for her age, Williams suggested, but Sarah could hear the curiosity in his voice now. Coleman's persistent questions were starting to plant seeds of doubt. Or maybe she's hiding something, Coleman pressed. I think we should look into her background more carefully. For security reasons, Williams sighed. Coleman, unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, a soldier's privacy is protected. Martinez does her job, follows orders, and stays out of trouble. That's more than I can say for some people around here. The conversation ended, but Sarah knew Coleman wouldn't let it go. He had the persistence of someone who believed he was destined for greater things and couldn't understand why others didn't recognize his potential. He saw Sarah's quiet competence as a personal challenge, a puzzle that needed solving. That evening, Sarah returned to her small apartment and tried to lose herself in routine. She cooked a simple dinner, cleaned her already spotless kitchen, and attempted to read. But Coleman's words echoed in her mind. He was getting too close to asking the right questions, and eventually someone might start looking for answers. She walked to her bedroom closet and stared at the black case hidden behind her civilian clothes. Inside that case lay not just a medal, but the memory of the worst and best day of her life. The day her team had been ambushed while providing security for a convoy carrying medical supplies to a remote village. The day she had single-handedly held off 30 insurgents for 6 hours while calling in air support and coordinating the evacuation of wounded civilians. The day she had saved 43 lives by making decisions that would haunt her forever. The medal had been awarded in a closed ceremony with no media present. The citation had been classified. The mission had been erased from official records. Sarah Martinez had been given the highest honor her country could bestow, and then been sworn to secrecy about why she deserved it, because sometimes national security mattered more than national heroes. But now, months later, working in a warehouse where her biggest challenge was dealing with Coleman's insecurity, Sarah wondered if the secrecy had been worth it. She had given everything for her country, and in return, she had been given a medal she couldn't display and a story she couldn't tell. Tomorrow, she would return to the warehouse and continue being the mysterious soldier who didn't fit anyone's expectations. She would clean equipment and ignore whispers and hope that Coleman's curiosity would eventually find a new target. But deep down, Sarah knew that secrets this big had a way of surfacing when you least expected them, and when they did, everything would change. 2 months into her assignment at Fort Braxton, Sarah's carefully constructed invisible life began to crack. It started with something small, something she couldn't have predicted or controlled. A new shipment of equipment arrived with a manifest error, and Master Sergeant Williams needed someone to inventory the advanced tactical gear that had been mistakenly delivered to their basic supply depot. Martinez, Williams called across the warehouse floor. You're detail-oriented. I need you to catalog this specialized equipment before we ship it back to where it belongs. Sarah approached the pallets of gear, and her breath caught in her throat. Night vision goggles, advanced communication systems, specialized weapons she had used in places that didn't exist on any official map, equipment that belonged to units like the one she had served with, units that operated in the shadows between official military operations and classified missions. She picked up a pair of night vision goggles, and her hands moved automatically, checking the battery compartment, testing the adjustment mechanisms, calibrating the focus with the fluid precision of someone who had depended on this exact equipment to stay alive in the Afghan mountains. Damn. Martinez, said Private Johnson, who had been assigned to help with the inventory. "You handle that gear like you've used it before. Most of us have only seen that stuff in training videos." Sarah forced her hands to slow down, to move with the careful uncertainty of someone unfamiliar with advanced tactical equipment. But the damage was done. Johnson had noticed. And in a warehouse where every interaction was analyzed and discussed, Johnson's observation would spread like wildfire. Within an hour, Coleman had heard about Martinez's suspicious familiarity with specialized gear. By the end of the day, he had cornered Johnson for a detailed account of exactly what he had witnessed. She knew exactly how to use it, Johnson told Coleman during their evening break, not like someone who had read about it or seen it in training, like someone who had used it in the field. Coleman's eyes lit up with vindication. "I knew something was off about her. Nobody goes from basic training to handling advanced tactical gear like a veteran. She's been lying about her background." But Coleman's investigation hit a wall when he tried to dig deeper into Sarah's military records. Her file was clean but strangely sparse. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, advanced individual training at Fort Lee, assignment to Fort Braxton, no deployment history, no specialized training schools, no commendations or disciplinary actions. It was the military record of someone who had never done anything noteworthy in their entire career, which made her obvious expertise with tactical equipment even more suspicious. "Something's not right here," Coleman told Williams during a private meeting in the supervisor's office. "I've been in the military for 8 years and I've never seen a personnel file this clean. It's like someone scrubbed it." Williams frowned as he reviewed Sarah's file on his computer screen. Coleman was right, the record was unusually sparse. Most soldiers accumulated some kind of paper trail over their careers. Training certificates, performance evaluations, letters of commendation, even minor disciplinary actions. But Martinez's file read like someone had taken a standard template and filled in only the bare minimum required information. "Maybe she just hasn't been in long enough to accumulate much of a record," Williams suggested, but his tone suggested he was starting to share Coleman's suspicions. "Or maybe someone doesn't want us to know what her real record looks like," Coleman pressed. "Think about it, Sergeant. A soldier who handles advanced tactical gear like a combat veteran, but has no combat experience on paper. A soldier who acts like she's seen things but supposedly has never been deployed? That's not normal." Williams closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "What exactly are you suggesting, Coleman?" "I'm suggesting we contact her previous duty stations. Talk to people who worked with her during training. Find out what really happened before she got here." But when Williams made those calls, he hit another wall. Sarah's drill sergeants from basic training remembered her as competent but unremarkable. Her instructors from AIT recalled a quiet soldier who followed orders and kept to herself. Nobody had any stories about exceptional performance or unusual incidents. It was as if Sarah Martinez had been specifically designed to be forgettable. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her work. Unaware that her carefully maintained cover was beginning to unravel, she had grown comfortable with the routine of warehouse duty, with the predictable rhythms of inventory and maintenance. For the first time since Afghanistan, she was sleeping through the night without nightmares. The constant hypervigilance that had kept her alive in combat was finally beginning to fade. But that very comfort made her careless. It happened on a Thursday afternoon when a new soldier, fresh from basic training, was struggling with a jammed rifle during routine maintenance. The young private, barely 18 years old, was growing frustrated as he tried to clear the malfunction using techniques from his training manual. Sarah watched from across the warehouse as the private's frustration mounted. She could see exactly what was wrong with the rifle, could solve the problem in 30 seconds. But helping would mean demonstrating knowledge she wasn't supposed to have. The private's frustration turned to panic when he accidentally triggered the rifle's safety mechanism while trying to clear the jam. Now the weapon was locked in a configuration that wasn't covered in the basic maintenance manual. The young soldier looked around desperately for help, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing fear of having to report a damaged weapon to his supervisor. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She walked over to the struggling private and quietly asked, "Mind if I take a look?" Before he could answer, Sarah's hands were on the rifle, her fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had cleared similar malfunctions under enemy fire. She released the safety mechanism, cleared the chamber, and reset the rifle's operating system in one fluid motion that took less than 20 seconds. "There," she said simply, handing the weapon back to the grateful private. Just a simple malfunction. Happens all the time. But Sergeant Coleman had been watching from across the warehouse. He had seen every movement, every precise manipulation of the rifle's complex mechanisms. He had seen a supposedly inexperienced soldier perform advanced weapon maintenance that even he couldn't do without consulting a technical manual. And this time, he had witnesses. Martinez. Coleman's voice cut across the warehouse like a blade. My office. Now. As Sarah walked toward Coleman's small supervisor station, she felt the weight of months of careful deception beginning to collapse around her. She had survived firefights and ambushes, had made impossible decisions under impossible pressure, but she might not survive having her true identity discovered by a frustrated sergeant with something to prove. Because the mission that had earned her the Medal of Honor wasn't just classified, it was the kind of classified that people disappeared for talking about, the kind of secret that national security agencies killed to protect. And now, in a warehouse in North Carolina, that secret was about to be exposed by her own inability to watch a young soldier struggle with a problem she could easily solve. The careful anonymity she had built was crumbling, and Sarah had no idea what would happen when the truth finally came to light. Coleman's makeshift office was little more than a desk and 2 chairs crammed into a corner of the warehouse, separated from the main floor by thin partition walls that provided the illusion of privacy. Sarah sat across from him, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while Coleman paced behind his desk like a prosecutor preparing his closing argument. That was impressive. Martinez, Coleman began, his voice dripping with false admiration. Really impressive. The way you handled that rifle malfunction, most soldiers with years of experience couldn't have done it that smoothly. Sarah said nothing. See? That's what's been bothering me about you, Coleman continued, his pacing becoming more agitated. You're too good at things you're not supposed to know how to do. Too calm under pressure, too experienced for someone with your background. Through the thin walls, Sarah could hear the warehouse growing quiet as other soldiers strained to listen to the confrontation. She recognized the sound of work stopping, of conversations dying mid-sentence as people focused on the drama unfolding in Coleman's office. I've been making some calls, Coleman said, stopping his pacing to lean forward on his desk. Your training instructors barely remember you. Your drill sergeants say you were unremarkable. But here you are, handling advanced tactical equipment like you've been using it for years. Care to explain that? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I pay attention during training. Coleman slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp sound echoing through the warehouse. Don't lie to me. I've been in this military for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone pick up advanced skills that fast just from paying attention. You're hiding something, Martinez, and I'm going to find out what it is. The confrontation might have continued escalating, if not for an interruption that changed everything. Master Sergeant Williams appeared in the doorway, his face grim and his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. Coleman, what's all this shouting about? Williams demanded. I'm conducting an investigation into Martinez's background, Sergeant, Coleman replied, trying to regain his composure. There are serious discrepancies between her stated experience and her demonstrated capabilities. Williams looked from Coleman to Sarah, who remained seated calmly despite the accusations flying around her. What kind of discrepancies? She handled that rifle malfunction like a combat veteran, Coleman said, his voice rising again. But according to her file, she's never been deployed. She's never seen combat. Hell, she's barely been in the military long enough to know which end of a rifle to hold. Williams frowned. He had noticed Sarah's competence with equipment, her calm demeanor under pressure, the way she carried herself like someone who had seen serious action. But he had also seen her personnel file, which told a very different story. Martinez, Williams said, his voice more gentle than Coleman's had been. Is there something about your background that we should know about? For a moment, Sarah considered telling them everything. About the classified mission in Afghanistan. About the ambush that had killed half her team. About the 6 hours she had spent alone on a mountainside, picking off insurgents one by one while coordinating air support and protecting a convoy full of wounded civilians. About the Medal of Honor that sat in a black case in her bedroom closet, wrapped in tissue paper and sworn to secrecy. But her oath of silence was more than just military protocol. It was protection for the families of the soldiers who had died on that mission. Protection for the intelligence assets who had provided crucial information. Protection for future operations that might save other lives. No, Sergeant, Sarah said quietly. There's nothing I can tell you. Coleman's face flushed red with frustration. She's lying. I know she's lying. Nobody develops those skills without real experience. Nobody stays that calm under pressure without having been in serious situations. She's been somewhere, done something, and someone's covering it up. The argument was interrupted by Private Chen, who appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable but determined. Excuse me, Sergeant Williams. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. Williams turned to Chen with barely concealed irritation. This better be important, Private. It is, Sergeant. It's about Martinez. Chen held up a small piece of paper. I was cleaning out the lockers in the women's barracks, you know, the monthly inspection you ordered? And I found this in Martinez's locker. Chen handed Williams the paper and his face went pale as he read it. It was a receipt from a military metal framing service dated 6 months earlier. The description line read, Medal of Honor, bronze star with light blue ribbon, rush order for private display case. The warehouse fell completely silent. Williams looked from the receipt to Sarah, whose calm expression had finally cracked. For the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she looked vulnerable, exposed, like someone whose deepest secret had just been torn away from her. Martinez, Williams said, his voice barely above a whisper. Is this real? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of months of careful deception collapsing around her. The secret she had protected so carefully, the identity she had hidden so completely, was now exposed by a simple receipt she had forgotten to throw away. Yes, Sergeant, she said quietly. It's real. Coleman's mouth fell open. The Medal of Honor was legendary in military circles, the highest decoration for valor, awarded only to soldiers who had displayed extraordinary heroism in combat. Fewer than 70 living recipients existed in the entire world, and none of them were supposed to be working in a supply warehouse at Fort Braxton. But that's impossible, Coleman stammered. Your file says, your record showed. My record shows exactly what it's supposed to show, Sarah said, standing slowly from her chair. The mission that earned me that medal is classified above top secret. The unit I served with doesn't officially exist. The operation never officially happened. And everyone who was there is sworn to secrecy for the rest of their lives. Williams studied Sarah's face, seeing her clearly for the first time. The quiet competence, the way she handled equipment, the calm under pressure, it all made sense now. She wasn't hiding something shameful. She was hiding something so honorable, so extraordinary, that the government had buried it in classified files to protect national security. The convoy ambush, Williams said suddenly, recognition dawning in his eyes. 6 months ago, Afghanistan, the one where a single soldier held off insurgents for hours and saved 43 lives. The one where they said the hero's identity was classified for security reasons. Sarah nodded slowly. Operation Mountain Guardian. My team was providing security for medical supplies heading to a remote village. We were ambushed in a valley with no cover and no backup within 50 miles. I lost 3 teammates in the first 5 minutes. The warehouse had grown so quiet that every word carried to the furthest corners. Soldiers who had been whispering about Sarah for months now listened in stunned silence as she finally told her story. I spent 6 hours on that mountainside, Sarah continued, her voice steady but heavy with memory, picking off insurgents one by one, calling in air support, coordinating medical evacuation for wounded civilians. By the time backup arrived, I had eliminated 30 enemy combatants and saved the lives of everyone in that convoy. Coleman sank into his chair, his face pale with the realization of how wrong he had been. This quiet soldier he had mocked and belittled wasn't hiding failure or incompetence. She was hiding the kind of heroism that most soldiers only dreamed of achieving. The Medal of Honor ceremony was held in a classified location with no media present. Sarah explained. The citation was sealed. My identity was protected, because the intelligence we gathered during that mission is still being used in ongoing operations. I was transferred here under a cover identity to give me time to recover while keeping my real background secret. William shook his head in amazement. And you've been here for months listening to us question your competence, your dedication, your right to wear the uniform. Why didn't you say anything? Sarah looked around the warehouse at the faces of soldiers who had spent months underestimating her, dismissing her, treating her like she didn't belong. Her voice was quiet but clear when she answered. Because sometimes the hardest part of being a hero isn't earning the medal. It's living with what you had to do to earn it. Those 3 teammates I lost, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Kim, they had families who deserved to know their loved ones died heroes. But because the mission was classified, their families were told they died in a training accident. Tears formed in Sarah's eyes for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton. So I carry their stories along with my own. I carry the weight of 43 lives saved and 3 lives lost. And some days, working in a warehouse where the biggest challenge is organizing equipment feels like exactly the kind of peace they would have wanted me to find. The warehouse remained silent as Sarah's words sank in. Coleman sat frozen in his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Williams stood at attention, unconsciously offering the respect he should have recognized months earlier. And throughout the warehouse, soldiers who had questioned Sarah's place among them now understood they had been working alongside a living legend. Private Chen stepped forward, her young face filled with awe and respect. "Ma'am, I just want to say, it's been an honor serving with you, even if we didn't know who you really were." Sarah smiled through her tears, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. For months she had hidden her true self, believing that anonymity was the only way to find peace. But now, surrounded by fellow soldiers who finally understood her sacrifice, she realized that hiding her truth had only deepened her isolation. "The honor has been mine," Sarah replied. "All of yours. Because every day you do your jobs without recognition, without glory, without anyone thanking you for your service. That's real heroism too." Master Sergeant Williams stepped forward and extended his hand to Sarah. "It would be my privilege to shake hands with a Medal of Honor recipient." As Sarah shook his hand, then Chen's, then the hands of soldiers who approached from across the warehouse, she felt something she hadn't experienced since that day in Afghanistan. She felt like she belonged somewhere again, not as the mysterious soldier who kept to herself, but as Sarah Martinez, Medal of Honor recipient, who had learned that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't displayed in combat. Sometimes it was displayed in choosing to trust people with your truth. Coleman remained in his chair, staring at his hands as his worldview crumbled around him. The soldier he had spent months belittling and investigating was everything he had always wanted to be, a true hero who had earned her place in military history through courage and sacrifice, beyond anything he could imagine. And for the first time in his military career, Sergeant Rick Coleman understood the difference between demanding respect and earning it. From that day forward, Sarah Martinez continued working in the warehouse at Fort Braxton, but she no longer worked alone. She worked surrounded by soldiers who knew exactly who she was and what she had done for her country. And in the evening, she went home to an apartment where the Medal of Honor sat displayed on her mantelpiece, no longer hidden away, but serving as a reminder that some secrets are worth keeping and some truths are worth sharing. The warehouse had found its hero, and the hero had finally found her home.